Oh my God. Welcome back to Green Rush Live for Friday afternoon here in Pro Cannabis Media. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media. Very proud to have a live phone in Zoom call talk show on the business of cannabis every Friday here at Pro Cannabis Media on all those social media platforms that we're on, like your YouTube, your LinkedIn Live, your Facebook Meta, and Twitch. And did I forget one? Yes, Pro Cannabis Media, now streaming 24/7 live on our homepage. So you want to check that one out too. Josh Kincaid is with us from the left coast, and an old friend, David Rabinovitz, has joined us in here because he has been the champion for interstate commerce. And before David, before I pat you on the back, I'm patting you on the back. So see if you can control yourself, because I'd really like to welcome in our media guy, Zack Huffman from Grown In. It's a great newsletter. I read it on a regular basis. His beat is the New England area. And Zack, pleasure to meet you and welcome to Green Rush Live.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
How did it come about? How did you end up with that gig with Grown In? And then we can give a plug a little bit for the other Grown In newsletters that are out there.
Sure. So, well, first I'll start with Grown In itself. I think they're going on like roughly 3 years now that they've been around.
Yep.
And for about the first 2 years of Grown In's existence, it primarily covered the Midwest, Illinois, Michigan, Missouri, and then Ohio. Last fall, they started expanding their coverage, and their first kind of step outside of the Midwest was New England. So I live in Massachusetts, so they were looking for a reporter who was local, and I got lucky. So before then, I had I've written for local papers in the Boston area. I wrote for Courthouse News for about 5 years, which is why I have no choice but to cover this main case.
Right.
And then for the last 10 years off and on, I've also written for Dig Boston. So, alt media is kind of in my wheelhouse.
I gotcha. Well, alt media, I always came from traditional media, and now I'm part of the alt media, I guess, because we are just talking about cannabis 24/7 here. Walk us through this ruling by this circuit court and what implications it has, not only for the state of Maine, but perhaps for interstate commerce all over the United States.
Well, this ruling starts with Maine's residency requirement. And so Maine, initially, they required that all owners, managers, basically anyone who can make a decision, whatever, it was kind of broadly defined in a company that either was providing medical or adult use had to be a resident of Maine. Now, before this current, lawsuit that we're talking about, the NGP or Wellness Connection, they had actually sued the state over the adult use residency requirement. And that was in federal court. And during that federal case, the state essentially reached a settlement saying, all right, we're just not going to enforce the residency requirement for adult use. And can we just drop this case? And that's what happened. And then, of course, a couple months later, they move on to the medical market. And so you have the same companies, Wellness Connection, Wellness Connection is a locally owned, homegrown company in Maine, but Acreage wants to buy them. And so Acreage cannot buy them with this residency rule in place. So they sued again. And this time you had a patient activist group get involved that kind of helped push forward when the state may not have been willing to fight. I mean, that's just speculation. At the federal level, the judge ruled against the state, saying that this rule violates the Dormant Commerce Clause of the Constitution. And that's kind of what was being appealed. So I don't know how much you've kind of discussed that aspect of it.
Oh yeah. Well, David will debrief, because he's the one who found Robert Michos, this Vanderbilt professor, who wrote a paper about it, got published, and David read it because David reads everything. David, I'm sure you have a few questions, some comments about this whole thing.
Well, no, I'm going to let Zack keep going, because the article that I wrote back in April was a result of two things. It was Zack's coverage on, I believe, April 7th or April 8th of the case that was just decided. He covered the oral arguments, and I think did a phenomenal job on that. And so I'm going to let Zack keep going. I think what I did built upon a lot of what he already had done. So I think I'm going to leave it to the expert here
All
with
right.
the foundation.
Well, he's on the beat. That's for sure. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Zack.
I mean, in case you couldn't tell, David and I have had several conversations about this topic in the past. So we are both very aware of where the other one stands. So, the state lost at the federal level, and of course, they appealed with the support of this activist group. Sorry, the exact names are escaping me. So they appealed to the First Circuit. And then during those oral arguments, it definitely seemed like the panel, they argue before at the First Circuit, you argue your case before a panel of 3 judges. And it seemed like for the most part, they were taking the side of the company that this does, in fact, violate Dormant Commerce Clause. And the important distinction is it's easy to kind of look at this and say, oh, well, the Dormant Commerce Clause is supposed to regulate interstate commerce, over commerce over state borders. That doesn't exist in cannabis because you can't, bring weed over the border. What was argued by, Acreage and Wellness Connection was that it wasn't cannabis that was being transferred over state lines, it was investment dollars. And so that's really what they were arguing, is that the investment market for cannabis was being unfairly restricted by this residency requirement. And the First Circuit seemed to agree, at least, 2 out of the 3 panel judges.
Josh, I don't want to ignore you. If you've got some comments or questions for Zack or David, knock yourself out.
I'm actually curious about that area. Was the legalization process through a ballot measure, or was that done through legislation and not on a vote?
Adult use in Maine was a ballot measure.
It was a ballot measure. Okay. Are you seeing that being a difference? Because with a lot of ballot measures on the West Coast, there's a lot less corporate interests, right? Whereas some of these limited license states have a lot of influence from a very small amount of folks. And then that can really kind of change or dictate on how things are being done. So do you have a feeling that there's a lot of lobbyists being pushed behind this, or is this still kind of an open free market?
I mean, there's certainly, lobbyist influence. It's kind of hard to tell what the difference is, looking, obviously my perspective is very much New England. And so I do have a mix of those versions, or those varieties. Massachusetts and Maine were both legalized adult use through the ballot. But say Connecticut, Vermont, and Rhode Island did it through the legislature. It does seem like, for instance, in the case of Connecticut, that the way it's been legalized through the legislature has been a way that very much benefits a very, specific set of operators. So, I guess in theory, there is more opportunity when it is ballot based. But at the same time, I mean, at least with Maine, although the voters legalized it in 2016, it took a while to be legalized because, of course, the next step is the legislature has to write the rules. And at the time, Maine had a governor named Paul LePage, who was a kind of one of the old school Tea Party candidates who came in that first wave against Obama, I think 2010, maybe he got elected. He was very much anti-weed. And so he spent most of his time in the governor's office fighting any efforts from the legislature to fulfill the will of the voters. So it took a bit longer for Maine, and perhaps that gave more time for the legislature to kind of be more specific in how they're crafting this. But I mean, yeah, sorry.
David, from your standpoint in the bubble that you're sitting at on the East Coast, are you seeing the same thing where the ballot initiatives have maybe less influence versus there may be more protectionism is what I'm curious about from the legislative standpoint? If there's lobbyists and interested groups, they're not going to want to push for this interstate commerce because they're going to want protectionism. Are you seeing that?
I don't know if I'd say I'm seeing that, but obviously the MSOs, the larger MSOs have money now, and if they have money, they're going to hire whatever you want to call it, advisors, attorneys. They're ultimately people who are going to be lobbying on their behalf, right? Mm-hmm. Versus the grassroots folks who are putting the questions are trying to get a much purer market with a lot more equity in it. So I'm not sure how I'd respond to that. I think that by the time legislation gets passed, the local advocacy groups are in the legislators' ears. Look what just happened in Massachusetts. It took 2 years, but the governor signed a bill that upended our regulatory structure, at least as to how municipalities grant the local approval, right? And it is much more leaning toward what the grassroots folks wanted than what the institutional municipalities wanted. So I don't know. I'm not sure how to answer your question, but I don't know that there's outsized influence one way or the other, whether it's legislatively created or done at the ballot box by voter initiative.
Zach, I'm sure you know Shalene Title, the former commissioner, right?
Yep.
She's obviously concerned what this ruling might be, what effect it might have on social equity applicants. How's your read on that?
I mean, there's certainly a possibility that this could have a negative impact on social equity applicants. I think the important thing to remember, though, with this ruling is this isn't a ruling that's changing anything like from one day to the next, like now that it's been ruled that the Dormant Commerce Clause can regulate weed, it doesn't mean tomorrow you're going to have trafficking over the state border. There's a lot of other dominoes that have to fall.
Right.
And it's possible this could lead towards more legal battles against social equity status, but they'll have to be initiated.
Yeah. I think Mikos was quoted in an article yesterday, and that's what he pointed out: is if you can't restrict out-of-state parties in favor of in-state parties, does that mean that a lot of the in-state social equity programs could be challenged on the grounds that in Massachusetts, home delivery and social consumption licenses are exclusively available to social equity folks. And to qualify for social equity, you have to be a Mass resident. So that means that an out-of-stater can't get those licenses. I'm not sure how that all falls out. That's way above my research grade. And frankly, I'm not that focused on it, really. I can't see them saying, well, we're going to cut. First off, a case is going to have to go all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court for the Supreme Court to say, we don't want any more affirmative action type stuff, even in cannabis. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure how far they're going to go.
Isn't the Supreme Court saying, don't put any more cannabis cases in front of us, please? I mean, other than Clarence Thomas, I think that's where they're going. But right, they don't want to have to deal with it.
This is not far, Jimmy, from what you've heard out of my mouth for the past year, which is I don't think that Washington, D.C. is going to do anything for cannabis. I don't think they can get out of their own way. Even the people that are pro-cannabis don't understand the market, which is why their bills come out and the industry craps all over them. I mean, I believe for a while, and I said it back in April, marijuana legalization in the United States is going to get handled by the courts. And when the right case goes to the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas has pretty much already said, I think he's going to come down under the 12th Amendment of equal protection and say, you can't allow one group that's got money and more white guys in it to be dealing in cannabis and then go after poor street dealers who are people of color and lock them up for the same thing. Right? Not equal protection under the law. You either enforce it and say marijuana is illegal, or you say it ain't illegal and you step away from it.
Yeah. I mean, and that, do you think, again, I just had Morgan Fox on, and everybody knows I get very frustrated about the political divide that is in our U.S. Senate right now, because we're not governing. They're not governing. They're staying elected. And that is wrong. And now the Supreme Court has become politicized. So there's two branches right there, guys, that I'm a little concerned about, right? Or at least 1.5 branches. But where's this going to go, Zach? What do you think will be the implications of this? Or is it really almost symbolic that something's wrong here? It is a shot across the bow. The industry is going to glom onto this and saying, look, interstate commerce is coming, whether you guys legalize this or not. It's here. We're going to fight it forever. Where do you think we're going to go with that?
I mean, I think there's certain, if we're looking at an end game of legalization, right? I feel like there's a number of different paths. You have more and more states that are willing to legalize. That's going to increase it. That's going to increase the palatability of it as an issue, I think. I don't see a solution in the U.S. Senate anytime soon. But I do also think a lot of the progress we're gonna see will be done through the courts. I mean, there's a lot of creative lawyers. And that's really what it takes. Get a creative lawyer, find your case, and you can, chip away at prohibition that way.
How much of these companies are going to be losing out in the meantime, though? Because anytime you have investors sitting on the sideline waiting for volatility to calm down, waiting for uncertainty to figure itself out, you're wasting a lot of time and a lot of opportunities. First mover advantages are moving away.
Mhm.
Time value of money is being diminished. And so, I just talked to an investor earlier today who was talking about these social justice warriors going out there and trying to get everything they want. And I'm all for social equity. I think there's been a lot of damage with the war on drugs with minorities. But at the same time, the virtue signaling in politics with bureaucrats who really don't care except for the pennies that they earn. It seems like they're just moving from one side to another, one topic to another, talking one side of their mouth, and not really doing anything. I don't see action. I just see virtue signaling from bureaucrats. So in the meantime, you have all of these people who actually need something to move, all of these entrepreneurs, business people, people of color that want to get into the industry. Are we actually going to do something? Or are we just going to sit here and destroy the potential investment opportunities that these folks have?
Josh, do you think that that's something that needs to be done at the federal level or the state level?
I think it needs to be something done at the state level and have the feds just get out of the way.
I mean, you got to look at
Massachusetts-
viability. Federal's not going to do it. State seems to be willing in some cases.
Right.
Massachusetts just passed the law I was mentioning earlier. They're going to direct, I think it's 15% of the tax revenue into a separate fund where they will provide either grants or loans to social equity applicants who are trying to get into the business. I mean, I think that's going to be huge. I spoke to a social equity applicant the other day. He was all excited about it. I tried to temper his enthusiasm with, this isn't going to happen until next spring because they're not putting money up. They're saying take money out of sales tax revenue. And it's going to take a while before that gets funded in any meaningful way. Plus, they got to get whatever institution is going to pass this money out. They have to put that together, recruit board members, decide whether they're only funding full operations or they're going to give people exploratory grants or that type of thing. But I think that's at the state level. I think that's what's going to solve the problem you're referring to of getting social equity folks standing up in the business. I think the feds are only going to be in the way.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Zack, I want to ask you about your beat. How many of these meetings, New England's it's a pretty big territory. You're traveling all over from Augusta to Boston to Hartford. I mean, how do you get around to cover all these states?
Well, I will say I am, one of the fortunate repercussions of, COVID is that everyone does their meetings remotely. So that's how I'm able to kind of keep up.
Hasn't that helped? Wait, hang on a second. Hasn't Zoom helped news gathering?
I think it has to some extent.
Yeah.
It's, in the perfect world, if I could travel all the time, I mean, being in person is always going to be a little better, but this absolutely has increased, access to public meetings. And that aspect I think has been huge. I've been able to cover meetings in, the meetings I've regularly followed where, I've done the main medical work group meetings, obviously Mass CCC over in Worcester. I'm in the South Shore of Massachusetts. So even that will be a little bit of Vermont's meetings I cover, Connecticut Social Equity Council. Most of the actual travel I might do is just visiting grow sites, to be honest.
Why grow sites and not dispensaries, Zack?
Oh, I go to dispensaries,
okay.
But not officially.
I understand. I know. I understand. So let me ask you a question about as a media member, how much of your time is on digging or as opposed to regurgitating what's at these meetings?
I mean, it's a mix. I mean, covering the meeting is always a good way to capture information that everyone's following, but I spend most of my day digging. I mean, there's only so
Yeah.
many articles I have to write. And that's especially the case now. Grown In recently kind of shifted its format. For the longest time, we had, or at least for the last year, for the most part, we had separate newsletters for regions. We had a Midwest, New England, and then we had a Mid-Atlantic newsletter. We've kind of done away with that, and now we just have the general Grown In newsletter Monday, Wednesday, Friday, where between me and Mike Forche, my editor,
Yep.
we write more in-depth columns. So, yeah, I mean, we're not following the day-to-day meetings as much, but yeah, it's a lot of digging now.
What is the best way, Zach, that you're able to kind of keep your finger on the pulse of the industry to either adapt or pivot to stay relevant?
I think part of it is one thing that actually really helps us, if you look at our newsletter, is in every edition, we have aggregation of local news.
Mhm.
So we'll just look at what the news stories are that involve cannabis for the last week in our different regions. And honestly, just gathering that kind of keeps me up to speed. I keep my eyes on social media. I follow a lot of these meetings to see what the results are. And I think that's very helpful to kind of keep me up to speed. And as long as I always have a new question to ask, that, is an easy way to push me forward.
Mhm.
How much, when you mentioned social media, are you getting accurate information from social media, or are you getting reaction to what passes at some of these meetings?
Well, I mean, you get reaction. Now, if you look at social media, you're not always going to get a direct, like, accurate piece of information from there. But for instance, let's say, you're writing about a company that got in trouble for, say, stealing tips from their employees. And maybe you go on Reddit and you find a couple people who are saying, yeah, I worked at this company and it was terrible. So I reached out to them directly. I got them to prove it to me. They actually showed me reports they filed with the state about the tip theft. And now I've got sources who can give me that side of the story. You take it with a grain of salt, but yeah.
Right. No. It again, as long as you're getting to the person who posted it or has an inside of it, I think, and in a lot of ways, that has been a good thing for the turn away from traditional media. And now we have more alternative sources out there. And, as someone who spent 30 years in newsrooms, I just can't believe now how easy it is for these newsrooms to just report on what's on Twitter. Okay. And I mean, it's a quote thing. It just, here's a quote, and they put it up, and that's a news story because it depends on who it came from. And if it's, related to a news story, they put it out there. And I don't know. I like the idea of the digging. I like the old days of the phone calls and working the calls and all that. And then developing sources and that you can reach out to, face to face or Zoom to Zoom, at this point.
Well, I got a question about social media and why cannabis is ideal for influencer marketing. And is social media actually worth the blood, sweat, and tears?
I mean, I'd say, from what I understand, it's debatable whether it's actually worth it. I mean, there's only so much of attention, say, I create for myself in terms of what I do on social media. But I do know that, I'm able to find information that way. I just don't know how effective it is for self-promotion.
What makes it so ideal for influencers? Because it's new, because there's no like existing dominant folks in there. I mean, what makes it so ideal for influencers?
I think it definitely contributes to the success of influencers because there aren't any, because it is new. There's this opportunity for lots of folks to kind of go that route,
Mm-hmm. David, what's some stories that aren't being covered right now that you want to see more of?
Oh, gee, that's a great question, Josh. I'm actually not certain on that one.
You sent me an article about REITs back in April that are going to be crashing down. That
was my build on Zack's article and the reporting. The premise of that whole article was this case. And I do recall Jimmy telling me I got shredded by some of the guests he had on who thought the whole thing was a joke. And lo and behold, 2 days ago, that opinion came out of the first district, And what did they quote? They referred, or what do they refer to? Rohrabacher or Farr, the budget amendment, which was, as I laid out how I see the dominoes falling, that's one of the first dominoes that I think is going to fall. I'm sticking by everything I had in that April 25th article. And to anybody who's watching live, if you're on YouTube, it's in the chat, the link.
Just because you're early doesn't mean you're wrong, David.
That's right. It just means you get ridiculed more, but that's okay.
That's one of the things people don't look at when they look at the cannabis industry, is the influence of REITs and real estate value.
Yeah.
So if you, Massachusetts prices are going down right now. And Aaron Goins, who's been on the show in the past, called me the other day and was telling me he was in a dispensary in Brockton, and I think they had $25 eighths. But if you bought a second eighth, you got it for like 50% off, something like that. And
yeah, that's my dispensary. Yeah.
Right. And we did the math real quick. And what we determined was they're selling it at retail at about $1,500 a pound. Right. Start to think about those kind of numbers. Well, that means wholesale. If you're going to live right, you got to be selling it at $7.50 a pound. Prices are coming down. And as they come down, I'm sticking by what I had in that Canary article on cannabis.net, that the big MSOs are the ones who need to keep the protectionist walls up. They can't afford, with their expensive indoor grow facilities, to allow cheap West Coast weed to come in. And I'll tell you where that cheap West Coast weed is going. It's going to all the social equity players, because those are the folks who didn't have the money to become fully integrated. So you either got you grow it in-house and it's real expensive, and you're competing against some little operator down the street who's bringing it in from the West Coast and undercutting you on price. I think it's going to just be a fantastic time to be in the lower end of the weed business.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are we looking at a house of cards? Is it a race to the bottom here? Zach, what do you think?
I think to some extent, certainly if you're viewing it as in terms of investment opportunities. Because when it starts, everyone is, when the market starts in a state, everything's exaggerated, and then, people want to return, and that's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I think the house of cards is already, I made a prediction a while ago that I said 2022 is going to be the year of musical chairs. And a few months ago, a couple of merger and acquisition guys I know called me up and they said, explain to us what you mean by that. And I said, you're going to start to see the larger MSOs. Like Massachusetts, you're limited to 3 retail licenses. I said, you're going to see the people who've got 3 stores in Massachusetts are going to look at the worst store in their portfolio and say, you know what, let's get rid of that store and let's go get a license in a much better location. And that's exactly what's going on right now. We've seen it a couple of times. The MSOs is trading up their locations. Next year is going to be the year of the undertaker. We're going to start to see in a market like Massachusetts, we're going to start to see people going out of business. There's no doubt in my mind. We've got about total number of retail licenses. I was analyzing this earlier today in the state. This is coincidental, is 420. Out of those 420, 188 of them are provisional licenses. There's just about, it's like 45% of the licenses that are out there are for stores that are not yet open. So there's about 232 stores open, I think it is.
242, I think, actually, David. I think I looked that up. Really? Because the stuff I pulled off the commission this morning. The commission's 3 months behind, okay, right, when it comes to the public report.
I know that. So they had 232, whether it's 232 or 242, right? Yep. It still is. Think about the fact that prices are coming down, right? Dispensaries are offering deals of buy 1/8 for 25 and get the second eighth for half price. And we only have 50% of the stores open that have licenses. Do you understand how crushing that could be to the market if all these other 180 odd licenses actually open up?
That's right.
Well, yeah, and I would also add that this has been covered and grown in by my editor Mike. I mean, just look at Michigan. With their growing seasons, everything's bottoming out there. Like, that's a state that's now starting to see closures.
Yep.
Right.
And they started, I think, after us.
Right. Well, yeah.
Well, they just went nuts, I guess, with the cultivation licenses.
Yeah. Again, this is why I love doing live shows more than anything else, because we really can look at what's going on now and today, and then look back at it like David's been doing and saying, see, we talked about that 4 or 5 months ago. You know, it's a fascinating time. It's why this Pro Cannabis Media Group exists. And we're certainly happy to have people on that we can count on like David. And Zack, I tell you what, man, you're welcome here any Friday. You come up with a story you want to push Grown In, you're welcome on any one of these shows. All right?
Sounds good.
How do
Sounds like
people-
we're going to a commercial break, Jimmy.
I'm going to a commercial break.
Right.
Is that all right?
I'm gonna jump because I got a 5 o'clock client call that I'm 3 minutes
Who's
late.
running this? Is that
All right,
David
you
or
go ahead.
Jimmy?
Go ahead. You can. Well, it's a group effort, actually, Zack. David, thank you. Great to see you, Zack. How do people sign up for Grown In? You just Google it, right?
Yeah, grownin.com, grownin.com, or shoot an email to Zack, ZACK at grownin.com.
I think you and Mike and the rest of the team do a great job. It is must reading if you are in this industry, because I think of all of the people of all those newsletters, I really think you guys turn it around faster than some of these others that are repurposing content from like even 2 and 3 years ago. Sometimes I'm seeing now.
Yeah.
So we like the fresh stuff. Zack Huffman from Grown In, thank you. Josh, stick around. We've got another journalist coming in from New Jersey. Dan Uloa from Hedge, New Jersey is going to join us next. Don't go away. Green Rush Live continues after this.
With that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is The Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't, and I'm out.
Don't forget to smash that like button on your way out and check out these other videos that we've got.